Today on In the Shop, we answer one of the most common questions I get from my customers. Is it time to replace my car? So whether it's due to a major failure or you just want to upgrade from something like this old Ranger to this Hummer H1, hopefully this video helps you out a little bit. So this is a question I get all the time. Usually it starts off, your car gets towed into the shop and you bring it in, you're waiting patiently in the waiting room for us to come out and tell you what's wrong with your car, and we end up coming out and breaking the bad news to you. It's something major, a transmission or an engine or your time belt let go, and that's usually when we get the question, is it worth fixing it? So what I want to go over today are a few of the things that we like to consider when your car is a major failure, or even if you're just at the point where you're sick of putting a bunch of money into it. It's one of those things where you're constantly here, you're seeing us all the time, or you're a local shop, or even if you're doing the work yourself, and you just, do I replace my vehicle? Am I done? Do I just cut it off now, or do I continue going and hope for the best? So we're going to go over a few things here, and hopefully this helps you make your decision. So a few of the main points that I want to go over, things to consider. Now, bear with me, my handwriting is not the best. Cost of repair versus the value of your car. Obviously, if your car is worth $1,500 and it comes in and it needs $3,000 worth of transmission work, it's probably time to let it go. It's just not worth it. I try to stick to the rule of thumb. Now, this doesn't apply to everybody, but this is generally what we go by, is if the repairs, the total cost of repairs is more than 2/3 of the value of your vehicle, it's usually time to start looking at that point. So another thing to look at is future repairs that may be needed. So this is really where I really want to stress to you, if you have a major repair that comes up, to have your local mechanic look it over. Tell you exactly what the car needs besides that major repair. So is it going to be needing brakes soon? Is it going to be needing bushings in the suspension and shocks and tires and all those things to be considered? Because if you go and spend $3,000 on a $5,000 car and then it ends up needing brakes 3 months later and tires 4 months later and all that stuff, obviously you're going to start to get up over that cost cap that we talked about. Safety. This is the biggest one out of all of them. My biggest concern for my customers here, and I'm sure for you, is the vehicle safe? I don't care if your radio works. I don't care if your air conditioning works. None of that stuff really matters to me, obviously, unless that's what you want. But safety is number one. Is your car safe going down the road? Are you comfortable putting your family in it? Are you comfortable driving next to other people that have their families in their cars also? This should be your top priority, making sure that your vehicle is safe. Fuel economy and reliability. If you're driving an old clunker and the thing is absolutely terrible on gas, something to consider is a lot of these newer cars are really good on gas, and that can make or break your decision. I mean, if you're spending $300-400 a month on gas and you can get a car that's twice as efficient, that's part of a car payment right there alone. So does your car or truck suit your needs? So are you a growing family? Do you have that 2-door coupe and finally it's time to upgrade, so maybe you don't have to shove the car seats in the back anymore? I don't know about you, but I know that the smaller the car, the more difficult it is, and you start to consider that minivan more and more. I hate to say it, but it really is beneficial to have a vehicle that suits your needs. So you may have a slight attachment to your car, but if it's not working for you and your family, sometimes it's time to upgrade and move on to something else. And then car payment and insurance increase. So this is on the flip side, and one of the things that will tell you it is worth fixing your vehicle is, can you afford a car payment? And also things to consider are things like increased insurance and even something as simple as your excise tax bill. A lot of people forget about that. They buy a brand new car, they can afford the payment, they can afford the insurance, and then all of a sudden they get whacked with that $500, $600, $700 excise tax bill. I'm not sure how it is in other states, but I know in Massachusetts it's pretty costly sometimes for the excise tax. So I'm just going to go out in the shop now. I'm going to show you a few things on our little beat up shop truck just to kind of go over and things to consider that might help you make a decision on whether or not it's time to replace your car. So one of the things you want to do is start to look the whole vehicle over on the exterior. Things to consider, especially if you live in the northern states where we use a lot of road salt to treat the roads, is inspect the body. Very common for them to rot underneath here, and that's typically going to get to the point where it won't pass state inspection. Obviously, safety thing, if your vehicle won't pass state inspection, it's really not safe for the roads, so it's time to go. Then you want to get to the tires, and then you can use something like this simple tread depth gauge. These are pretty cheap to get. You can get them at almost any auto parts store. And just measure the tire tread depth. If you can't get one of these, you can always use a penny. The old trick is if you turn the penny upside down and the top of Lincoln's head is covered, you're usually pretty good. If it's getting close to his head not being covered, it's usually time to get rid of the tires. It's around 230 seconds is the minimum spec. So that's something to be considered. Once you've given a general look over around the exterior of the car, looking for rust, rot, trying to assess the value of the vehicle, then you can start to go underneath it and look at the chassis and the brakes and start figuring out what we have going on. So let's get this truck up in the air and start to look at the undercarriage, the brakes, the suspension components, the shocks, and try to assess how it looks underneath. So this is the part where I feel like if you're really not confident in what you're doing mechanically, you should have your mechanic look it over. Sometimes we hate to admit defeat, but sometimes you just got to have a professional do what they do. Things that you want to be looking for, or what you should be asking them to look for, are condition of the exhaust system. Are there any major leaks going on from anything else? On a truck like this, frame condition. It's very common for these trucks to have different components of the frame fail, the hangers for the leaf springs and the suspension, and other things like shock absorbers, brakes, and even sometimes you can get a better idea of the condition of the body from underneath and start to look around for things that might show up at a later date. You got to keep in mind future repairs. I mean, some of this stuff is unforeseeable. You can't control it all. But typically, a good mechanic can tell you this is going to fail in the near future, or this is going to be due, and maybe it's time to move on. Obviously, most mechanics, they're going to want you to do the repair. I mean, that's what we do. It's our job is to fix cars. We hate telling people to buy a new vehicle, but at the same time, I would rather have a happy and safe customer than just keep taking their money and they're going back and telling their friends, I'm always at the mechanic, I'm not happy, my car's a piece of junk. I mean, I'd rather you be happy in your car and then take it to us for the preventative maintenance that it needs down the road. So just keep that in mind when you're considering this switch. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but this Ranger is just about seeing its better days. You know, one of the hardest parts for me is sentimental value. I mean, I got this car right around the time that I met my wife, and, you know, I've had a lot of good memories in this truck through the business, and it's really been a big part of my life, and that's one of the biggest things to overcome when getting a new car. A lot of people get very attached to their vehicles, and it's just hard to say goodbye. They almost become a family member, but you got to remember that this is what gets you around. This is what keeps you safe, and this is what gets you back and forth to your job to help provide for your family or provide for yourself or whatever your situation may be. So you got to make sure that your vehicle is reliable. I mean, that's just the bottom line. It's got to be safe. It's got to be what's right for your family, and sometimes you got to set that sentimental value aside and just go for it and replace the vehicle. Now, I hope what we went over today helped you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to comment. And if you like what you saw, subscribe. And Have a great day, guys. Thanks for watching In the Shop.